Welcome back to the Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, on this Friday edition. Hope you're getting ready for a great weekend. I'm enjoying mine, getting started by talking to some great guests, like my next guest, Niger Innis. He is a writer. He is involved, a commentator for various media, national television, and always interested to hear his comments on what's happening out there. Niger, you have an interesting take that showed up over at the Daily Caller on how gun control has racist roots, and welcome to the program.
Oh, Kevin, it's great to be on with you. Let me just add, and I appreciate your introduction. Let me just add to it, and I'm also the National Outreach Director and Senior Strategic Senior Strategist for the TeaParty.net.
Awesome.
New position. And so I'm still wrapping my head around it, but it's a pleasure to be on with you. And yes, there's no question that gun control for Black Americans. Let me express what the Daily Caller was covering. They were covering a press conference of about 15 leaders from across the country, ministers, community activists, community organizers from the Black community all across this great country that are fully aware of the racist roots of gun control and how gun control has been visited upon the Black community since Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Kevin, the movie Lincoln is extremely popular, and Daniel Day-Lewis, of course, won for Best Actor on Sunday night. But and it dramatizes the struggle and the passage for the 13th Amendment, which really ended slavery. But and of course it ends with the assassination of Lincoln. But soon after Lincoln's assassination, and when blacks were just getting the benefits of full citizenship, many Democrats in the South, former rebels in the South, trying to take back power in the South, were making severe efforts to disenfranchise blacks, to undermine the citizenship of blacks in the South. And one of their first targets and one of their first goals was to take away the Second Amendment rights of Black Americans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, and I believe that there's probably truth to that, although I would probably argue there's probably a lot of northern whites who did not want blacks to have Second Amendment rights either.
Yeah, darn tootin'. No, well, yes.
And I just want to kind of chime in real quick, because we have this romantic view of Abraham Lincoln, and of course what the South had was an abhorrent institution, but it was an abhorrent institution that was financially funded by the North. 90% of all slaves that came from Africa came on boats that were owned by New York companies. And a lot of Americans would be shocked to know how many blacks volunteered for the Confederate Army. Shocking, thousands.
That is a little bit of history that people are not familiar with.
And what's interesting about that is that when they did volunteer for the Confederate Army, they got the same pay as their white counterparts. They did not get the same pay in the North. They actually got their uniforms for free in the South, just like the white soldiers didn't get it for free in the North. And so I guess what I like to say...
Let me make clear.
I like to say it's complicated. The whole situation historically is complicated.
I'm not one of these politicians or folk that like to be presumptuous and cast dispersion at the entire South and say that somehow the North was filled with a bunch of innocent people. That is not the case at all. I mean, the issue of slavery. First of all, slavery existed all over the colonies and all over the country, not just in the South. But in terms of the issue of gun control, very specifically, there's an interesting evolution. Or devolution, you can call it, because there's no question that in terms of systematic efforts by governments to implement gun control measures and visited upon blacks in the South definitely occurred in the South disproportionately after or during Reconstruction. But the interesting thing about it is that since then, You know, in the modern era, the gun control efforts that have been made have largely been made in the North, in big cities in the North, like Chicago, New York City, you know, Boston, Massachusetts. These are the places, incidentally, that have the highest crime
Yes.
rate.
Yes.
You have decent people that are doubly victimized. On
That's
the one
right.
hand, they're victims of violent crime, and on the other hand, they can't defend themselves because of these unbelievable gun control laws.
Yeah, I mean, you sit there and you look at it, and it's like you scratch your head. Wait a minute, Chicago? You want to use Chicago as an example of, why we need gun control? Yet it has the toughest gun control of any municipality in the country. How do you do that? How do you get away with that?
It's disgusting, you know, and the way you get away with it is you have politicians, black politicians, that are supposed to be serving their constituents, but instead of serving their constituents, they pray at the altar of the types of, like Michael Bloomberg and the liberal media elites, and see them as their primary constituents, as opposed to the single mother and the decent men in that community, and the local store owners that want to defend their property, their families, and their community.
Yeah, absolutely right. No question about it. Niger Innis is our guest, and he is a writer, a spokesperson. He's involved with the Tea Party. A lot of stuff I get excited about. I'm delighted that we've had you on and appreciate the conversation. And if people look at the history of gun control efforts, take what Hitler said. Hitler boasted, one of the very first things he did was disarm the people of Germany. And he talked about with pride about being the first modern country to disarm its population. Well, who were the ones that were punished the most later on by disarmament but minorities?
Absolutely. There's no question. I mean, you look at every tyrant, every dictator, and almost in every one of those cases, they have as an agenda removing arms, the ability of people to defend themselves against the dictatorship. And look, it's evil, it's wicked, but it makes sense. It's logical.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a tyrant, if you know you're going to run ramshard over the desires of the mass of the population, then of course you don't want them armed. Of course you don't want them to be able to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And that is what our founding fathers feared. That's why they are visionary in what they created. And, I keep hearing this nonsense about, the founding fathers didn't know that there would be assault weapons. They didn't know there'd be machine guns. They didn't know they weren't. Yeah, the founding fathers weren't aware of the internet either. They didn't know that you could view porn on your mobile phone either. But they did have the wisdom to implement the First Amendment.
Yep.
And they knew the importance of the First Amendment and the ability of the people to speak freely as being a fundamental concept, regardless what the vehicle would be.
Absolutely.
And they felt the same way about the Second Amendment.
And I believe that the people should have largely the same access to weapons that the government that could potentially oppress them. You know what? Bear arms, maybe that's the arms they can carry.
You got that right. I agree with you. I mean, fundamentally, the bottom line is when you interpret the Constitution properly and the Second Amendment properly, perhaps the most important phrase within the Second Amendment is that the Second Amendment is necessary for a free state. Yeah. And what they meant was that was a guard against tyranny. That was the fund. It wasn't about Indians. It wasn't about going to hunt deer.
No.
It was about defending against tyranny.
It was about a well-armed militia is what it talked about. And who's that militia? It wasn't the government's militia, especially if you read the Constitution. Article 1 talks about the creation of an army, but those armies were never allowed to exist for more than 2 years. This idea of prolonged retirement in the Army in the original Constitution, it was never intended. That militia is a militia designed to protect the liberty of the individual. Look where it's located. It's located in the 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, which are about individual protection against the state. It's not about
Absolutely.
the state. It's not about the state being protected by individuals. It's the other way around.
The people's insurance policy.
That's exactly right. That's why when we hear about, these religious liberty stories, it's mind-boggling to me. Well, we're protecting the state against religion? That's not what the 10 Amendments are about. It's about the exact opposite. In every case, the state is the one seen as the threat, not the individual, not the states, but not the individual states, but the federal government is seen as the threat in every one of the Bill of Rights. Every one of the Bill of Rights are designed to protect the states and the individuals from an oppressive federal government. And in my opinion, the Second Amendment, you know, the whole Constitution, they talk about checks and balances, and they only look at it in Article 1, 2, and 3. But I think the entire Constitution is filled with checks and balances. And one of the most important checks against a federal government that could go out of control is the Second Amendment. That's what it's there for. It's another check against the federal government.
That's exactly what it is. And look, I'm not a survivalist. You know, I love my country. I do not fear my government today. You know,
yep.
But you never know. That's why they call it an insurance policy.
Hey, you can leave that fear to me. All right, Niger Innis, he's with us. He's a Tea Party spokesperson. He's a writer. He's an advocate, and now a friend of The Price of Business that I look forward to having back on the program again.
Kevin,
great job.
Great show, and I look forward to being back.
You're a great American. Thanks for being with us.
Take care.
All right. When we come back, we're going to have more for you right here on The Price of Business.